My name is Matt Durrett. My date of birth is April 23rd of 1973. I was born in West Memphis, Arkansas. My parents are Chad and Lita. They still live in West Memphis. My father was a lawyer and still practicing law there.
Okay. Tell me about how you ended up from your hometown to Washington County in the position you are now.
University of Arkansas. That's how I got up here because of the University of Arkansas. Grew up a lifelong Hog fan and spent my youth coming to Little Rock football games and a Fayetteville football game or two. So I was kind of raised to be a Razorback. So when it came time for college, really only had one choice, and so I came up here, and I've been up here ever since.
So what other jobs did you have before you came to work for Washington County?
This was my first job out of law school. So I graduated law school in May of 1998 and spent the summer studying for the bar, took the bar and passed it, and got this job and started September 21st of 1999.
So talk about what you did when you came on. Who hired you and what was your job?
When I first started, Terry Jones was the elected prosecutor. So he's the one I interviewed with. He's the one that hired me, and he was prosecutor for, I guess, the first 8 years of my working here. So Terry got elected in 1992, so he was prosecuting attorney for 14 years from 1992 through 2006, and that's when John Threet got elected. But when I started, Terry was the elected prosecutor.
Well, what was your job like when you started? What would you do?
Now, when I started, it was a lot different than it is now. It was a lot smaller, for one. Washington County was, back then this was 21 years ago, so it wasn't like Washington County was a small place, but when I started, there were, I believe, 7 deputy prosecutors, 6 full-time and 1 part-time. So back then, when I started, you kind of got thrown in the middle of everything. I started off doing just about everything. I wasn't doing a lot of the major crimes, but other than that, I didn't really have any limitations on what kind of cases I was handling.
What are some of the ones that stick out in your memory, that some of the first ones you tried, or the first ones that you did?
Well, back in the early days, since we had such a small office, there were still a lot of cases, so we handled a pretty big caseload. And it was a lot of it was just keeping our head above water. And so back then, I think it was probably about 5 or 6 months into it when I tried my first case. And back then there was I was handling, I don't want to say small cases because, especially with cases involving a victim, every case is a big case, especially to the victim. But in terms of the big magnitude of cases, I wasn't handling homicide cases. Those are always the big cases that you see in a prosecutor's office, and those were pretty much handled by Terry Jones and John Threet. So those are the ones really that were kind of the memorable ones. But there's just all sorts of cases, handling some rape cases, a lot of drug cases. I remember handling a lot of drug cases because back when I started was back in the late 90s to early 2000s is when we had a whole lot of meth labs. That's kind of a big difference between then and now. Methamphetamine's still a large problem, but we used to have methamphetamine labs all over the place. That's one thing that's changed. But there were big meth lab cases. I remember a bunch of rape cases. I handled a case of a guy that shoplifting a pair of socks and from Dillard's and got into a fight with the loss prevention people on the way out and shoved them down and ran across the parking lot. And so that was one of my earliest trials, the robbery trial. That one was kind of memorable because of the odd facts, just kind of an odd case. So it's just a whole lot of different, wide range of cases.
We'll talk about what it was like to work first for Terry Jones, and then how it was different, or what how it was like to work under John 3.
Well, working for Terry and working for John, there were certainly similarities, but also differences. And I think one difference is it's just time has gone by. And so Terry was prosecutor until 2006. That's when John got elected prosecutor. And so over those 8 years, county's getting bigger, office is getting a little bit bigger. When John came on, it started getting a lot bigger. We started getting a lot more cases. Population really exploded. So that's really the big difference is from working for Terry and working for John is the size of the county and the size of the office, the size of the system. Because when I started, we took up a part of the office that we've got now, and we had empty offices. Now our office is comprised it's on the first and third floor. We're split up. Back then we were just on the third floor, and we share this third floor with the circuit clerk and the county clerk. It was the same way back then. Both those offices were still up here, but we've expanded our office both on the third floor and then downstairs. Back then, public defender office was on the first floor, and we've now taken over the office where the old public defender was. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big this office has gotten. Back then, the public defenders were, they had 5 or 6 lawyers and not much staff, and now they're over across the street because they outgrew the space on the first floor, and then they moved to another building, and then before moving to where they are now. So that's the big difference in working for Terry and working for John is that the office has gotten so much bigger, and I've been around so long that from the time that I started, I think there are 3 people still in the office. Now we're an office of about almost 40 people, including lawyers and staff. I should have done that. I'll kind of go over that part again. And one of the big differences in working for Terry and John is just the size of the office. I mean, now we're an office of nearly 40 people, and back in 1998, I don't know that we had 15 people working this office, lawyers and staff. We were handling about 2,000 cases back then. Now we're handling about 4,000. That's how many we filed last year, almost 4,100 new cases. So population's grown, it's just caused changes. A lot of the stuff is still the same in the sense of, and we're doing the same work. We're seeing the same type of cases for the most part. Some things we aren't seeing as much as before, but it's kind of more environmental change than anything else. When the work stays the same, just the surroundings change.
Talk about some of the judges that you've worked with over the years.
Well, when I started working, Bill Story was the criminal judge. Back then, the judges were Judge Story, Kim Smith, Jack Butt, John Lineberger. Stacy Zimmerman had just gotten elected, and those were the 5 judges. Actually, Judge Williams was the juvenile judge when I started. There was an election in '98, and Judge Zimmerman won that election, so she took over in 1999. Those were the 5 judges. There were 5 judges at the time. But also in 1998, Washington County, or the 4th Judicial District, had been given a sixth judge, and that was Mary Ann Gunn. She ran in 1998 against 2 or 3 other individuals, and so she got elected. She was the first judge in that division, and so that brought us up to 6 judges. And then I guess maybe in the 2003 legislative session, they gave the Fourth Circuit an additional judge, which was Joanna Taylor. But when I started, it was just those 5 judges. And so back then, one of the things I did as a younger prosecutor was I handled mental commitments. It's one of the duties of the prosecuting attorney is we handle mental commitments when someone is mentally ill and they're a danger to themselves or others, and someone can come in and file a petition to have them committed. And so I was handling those. So I got to appear in front of most of the judges, which was a little bit different because Judge Story was handling all the criminal cases. So I'd handle criminal cases with him, but I'd also do mental commitments with Judge Butt and Judge Lineberger, and that was unique, and for lack of a better term, it's really neat appearing in front of them, because those were 2 legends of the law here in the Fourth Circuit.
How would you describe their demeanor or their personality? What was it like?
Of who?
Lineberger and Butt, for example.
Well, Judge Butt he had been on the bench for almost 50 years. And I really had limited exposure to him. Judge Butt kind of seemed to me, a 25-year-old green lawyer, as just the typical Southern gentlemanly country lawyer type. He was, from my experience with Judge Butt, he was kind of a stickler for procedure. You know, he took the law very seriously. He wanted to make sure lawyers got it right. He had a red pen that when you had a case and he made a ruling and he wanted you to do an order, you'd take something up to him and he'd mark through it and he'd cross out stuff he didn't like, whatever. So he was a stickler for detail, but he was also very welcoming, very kind to as I said, a 25-year-old kid who didn't know anything. Didn't treat me as harshly as I may have deserved. Judge Lineberger was and is one of the friendliest people you ever meet. He was also a stickler for the rules, stickler for procedure. He believed in the law and wanted to make sure he got it right each and every time. But you'd go into his chambers and he'd always stand up and greet you like a long lost buddy, that firm handshake, and going in there just to get an order signed or whatever. Just as kind as can be. Just like Judge Butt treated me better than I deserved, but friendly as all get out. It's to this day, I obviously don't see him near as much as I used to, and see him very infrequently. But every time I do, it's just friendly as can be. He's got a laugh, always a big smile, just very personable person. That's kind of how he was as a judge. Real easygoing, but stickler for everything. He was as friendly as can be, but by God, he wanted things done right, and you were going to do them right. And he wasn't mean if you didn't get it right, but he wanted to make sure it was right.
Earlier you mentioned Judge Gunn, and I wanted to ask you about the drug court and
right.
How you think, because obviously drugs have impacted your docket, but how do you think that has worked? And just talk about just the whole concept of it, and then how the different judges have worked with that. Drug court
has, I can't tell you how good drug court's been. Drug court's been a great thing. When it started back in about 2000, I guess, and no one really kind of knew what to make of drug court. it was an unknown thing. No one knew how it was going to work. No one really knew what we were going to require of people. It was just something that was new and was foreign to people. And at some point, they determined that these individuals who had been transferred to drug court, you couldn't just get them treatment. They had to be monitored, and there had to be settings where they appeared to monitor their progress and everything else. And Judge Gunn volunteered to do that. And so that's when it got set up where they started doing regular status hearings. And she was the one, and back then, her courtroom was in the old courts building down there, by the old Mountain Inn. Down there on the corner, it's been torn down across from the old jail, the old jail. But that's where her courtroom used to be before they renovated the courtroom in the old courthouse. And so she set up status hearings for these people to come in and monitored them and just kind of kept up with how they were doing, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong, sanction them when it was necessary. And it just kind of, it started off just no one knowing really how it's going to work. And gradually, year by year, month by month, day by day, it grew. And it got to be the size that it is now. Now we've got a pretty robust drug court. And back then, it was just a handful of people. But Judge Gunn was the first drug court judge, and she kind of got it kick-started, got it going, steered it along through the infancy stages, grew it to be something that's pretty impressive. And I think that we've always had drug treatment as one of the sanctions, for lack of a better term, but when you put someone on probation, it's one of the things that we've always done is always get them drug treatment. Well, this was an alternative, and you focus in on treatment. And with the explosion of methamphetamine in the area, how it just got so huge, it was a really good thing, not just in the sense of, it helped a defendant from getting a criminal conviction. I mean, the biggest thing about it is it provided them treatment. And that's kind of what, in a lot of these cases, these low-level offenders, that's what they need. They need treatment. And you need a program in place for where someone who gets arrested for drugs, whatnot, drug or some drug-related offense, you can enter them to a program, you get them the help they needed, and you get them turned around, because I think we all benefit when an individual like that is, a working, contributing member of society. They're out there, have a job, they're paying taxes, they're supporting a family, they're doing things right, they're being a productive citizen. I think we all benefit from that, as opposed to someone who remains addicted to drugs and ends up in prison. So if you can correct that behavior, I think that is that should be our goal. You can't help everybody, but you focus on those you can, and you at least give it a shot.
Good. We talked earlier about the management styles and what it was like to work for Terry Jones and John Three. What's it like in your office? I mean, what do you try to do maybe similarly, or some things you've done different from what you learned from your bosses before?
Having had two bosses in Terry and John, you kind of see different managerial styles. John was more hands-on. That doesn't mean Terry was an absentee landlord. By no means, he wasn't. But they both had great managerial styles, and so you try to figure out. You can't, as a boss, I couldn't sit there and think, well, I need to do this that Terry did, I need to do this that John did. You have to have a style that fits your personality and fits your office. And what I learned from both of them is that you hire good people and you trust them to do a job. And so you can't have a situation where you're walking around looking over your deputy's shoulders. You can't go around micromanaging everybody. You got to hire competent people and you got to let them do their job. And you got to make sure that they're well trained. I mean, when you say I don't want to say just totally get out of the way, but when someone's hired, when we hire a new deputy, they learn the ropes in the system, learn how it works, learn what are what are, for lack of a better term, policies are. You hire someone, you teach them what the work ethic of the office is and what our goals are. And then you let them handle their cases. You trust them to do their job. Last thing I want is for to have a bunch of deputies sitting there concerned that I'm looking over their shoulder and micromanaging everything. When people call in and I think that people know that enough about this office. I don't have lawyers coming in trying to go over my deputies' heads, because that's not how we operate here. I mean, they handle their cases. They know about their cases, and so you trust them to do the job that they do. And that's kind of the best thing is you got to make sure you employ good people and you let them do their job.
You talked about the changing caseload. Besides that, what are some of the things that have changed over the time you've been in the office?
Technology. When I started, I had a desk phone and I had a beeper. And so Terry's policy, which continues to this day, was that every single deputy technically is on call 24 hours a day. If law enforcement or someone needs to get a hold of you, you have to be available, because police work doesn't stop at 5 o'clock and it doesn't start at 8 o'clock. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. It's 24/7, and so there's always stuff going on. So Terry felt that we always ought to be accessible to the police. So I had a desk phone and I had a beeper, and that's how. When I'm at home, I'd get a page from someone, and I'd return the call. Didn't have a computer at my desk, and didn't have a cell phone, and I call them kids because we've got a lot of youth in our office now, but that's something totally foreign to them. Whenever I needed an order done up, I had to take it to someone in the office, to one of our staff who had a computer, and ask them to type it up. It's a little bit different from the days of Andrew Zeiser when he was prosecutor. He had a little dictaphone, and he'd dictate letters, he'd dictate orders and whatnot, and give it to someone in the office to type up on a typewriter. But it wasn't much different. I mean, we had some computers, but didn't have a whole lot of them. And so I think it was probably 2000 when we started getting computers for everybody. But nowadays, technology is just taking over everything. And I say that, I don't mean to sound bad when I say it's taken over, because I think it's a good thing. I think it makes it a lot more accessible to the public, because now you can go online and pull up cases online in the clerk's office, and you can find documents online. And so that's one of the many benefits of technology. It's getting to a point where we're slowly moving to a fileless office. I mean, it's a slow move. I think that's kind of the trend for lots of offices, is you're moving away from having a whole lot of paper. I mean, as you look around my office, you'll see files everywhere in boxes, and I'm still a paper guy, so I like to touch things and feel them and write on them and everything else. That's probably the biggest. That's probably the biggest change, and it has made it has made life a lot easier because around the time I got a computer is around the time I got email, and so back before, certainly before 2000, didn't have email, but now we get everything via email, and we get a lot of reports by email. Back in the day, if you needed to send something to somebody that you didn't want to drive over there, you'd put it in the fax machine and send it through a page at a time. Now we get a lot of reports by email, and so it simplifies things. We can call up a detective on a case and say, "Hey, do you have that report on this particular case?" And they said, "Yeah." Here, let me pull it up. I'll send it to you in a second. You need something quick, you can get it quick now. There's no waiting a couple of days for someone to bring it down. So technology is, I think, without question, the thing that's had the greatest impact on our job and on the system in general.
One of the things, and this is partially a sheriff's question, but maybe more prosecutor, is we've got so many more people in jail now.
Right.
And, since the time the population has doubled, we've well more than doubled the
Right.
So why do we have so many more people in jail, even for like county commitments and stuff? And I know some of those are state prisoners. But
yeah, and that's got a lot to do with it. I think there's not one answer for that. I think it's a combination of things. The increase in jail population, I think you can point to several things. One being the increase in population. You can't deny that. You get more people in here, you're going to have more people getting arrested. So that's certainly one factor. There's always been a backlog of people in jail waiting to go down to the penitentiary. Always has been, always will be. So that's another factor. And when you have more cases, you're going to have more people that are going to the penitentiary. So you're going to have more people in jail waiting to go to the penitentiary. Also, when you got more cases, things don't move as fast as they did in the past. Things have slowed down considerably. That's another change that's happened, is the system has slowed down. And the system has kind of gotten overloaded. Just the sheer numbers of cases, it's taxing on the system. And it's not just taxing on our office, but it's taxing on the clerk's office, taxing on the public defender's office, and on the jail. And so you have more people who get arrested, and more cases that we're filing, and a longer wait between arrest and court date. And so you've got people who are sitting in jail waiting on their court date because they're waiting on a number of things. They're waiting on, say, results from the crime lab. Well, crime lab, they're having to process more and more and more cases each year. And so when the cases are coming in faster than they can get them out because of staffing issues, it starts to backlog. And so the longer there's a backlog, longer people have to wait. Sometimes some of them are in jail. More cases you have, the more mental evaluations you do. And so around the state there are more and more mental evaluations, and the number of doctors doing these evaluations hasn't grown the same percentage that the number of evaluations has. And so that's another thing that slows it down. There's just a lot of different things a lot of different factors that go into jail population. And so it's not just one thing, which makes it a little bit more difficult to fix. It makes it less of an easy fix. You do the best you can, you work on it, and you try to get that number down. Because, last thing you need is an overcrowded jail. Because you always want to make sure that you've got space in jail for people who need to be there. Not everybody needs to be there, but there are people out there who do, and you want to make sure there's space for them.
What about the different law enforcement, the sheriffs and the chiefs and different people you've dealt with? Because you guys work real closely with them. Who are some of the ones that stand out or that you remember?
Well, early on, when I first started at the sheriff's office, Kenneth McKee was the sheriff. And, I go back to, he was the one that started, but, I knew Hollis Spencer. I know Bud Dennis. Bud Dennis is, what can you say about Bud? Bud's just an outstanding guy, and he's another one that every time I see him, I got to stop and talk to him. I just enjoy talking to that man, just because of the person he is, but also you're talking to history there, and that's why I like talking to some of these older guys. But Kenneth McKee was the sheriff. I think you're going to tax my memory here. You're really going to test it. When I started back in 1998, Kenneth McKee was sheriff. Richard Watson was chief at Fayetteville, and Mike Blocker was chief at Springdale, I believe. Since then, we've gone through, I guess, 4 sheriffs, if you include Lee Owen, who was interim sheriff. When Steve Whitmill stepped down, Steve Whitmill took over for Sheriff McKee, and then when he stepped down and took another job outside law enforcement, Lee Owen took over for him to fill the gap between him and when Sheriff Helder was elected. So there have been 4 there. The leadership at law enforcement has been fairly steady. I think there have been 4 chiefs at Fayetteville and maybe 4 at Springdale. So over 21 years, that's not bad, because those are tough jobs. And those aren't jobs that you can expect someone to be able to last in for 20 years. Having Sheriff Helder around for as long as we've had him has been a blessing. That's a tough job. It's a tough job. Greg Tabor at Fayetteville's been in for a long time too. Those are tough jobs. So that's not a whole lot of turnover for that type of job. So over time, I was talking to Chief Tabor, I don't know, maybe a month ago, about changes, how things have changed, and back in the old days. And I commented to him because I think he had mentioned that it'd been a while since he'd been over to our office, and he had recognized fewer and fewer faces. And I'd commented to him that there aren't a whole lot of people still working at the Fayetteville Police Department as there were when I started, because a lot of them have moved on, a lot of them have retired. Policing's a hard job, very, very hard. And when you have your average person who can retire after putting in a certain number of years, most people don't necessarily retire because they may not be of an age where they need to retire. They can keep working. Policing's different. You see a lot of people who get their time in and they retire because I don't blame them. So that's one change you see a lot with law enforcement is you stay in this job long enough, there's going to be a lot of turnover. And so the people who were lower in the ranks when you started are now way on up there, that's the case with me. Is I've been around long enough where I've seen a lot of change, and I've seen people who were lower level officers and now are way up the ranks, and they'd probably say the same about the prosecutor's office. Is that way? I remember back when I started, that guy who's prosecutor now is that little snot-nosed little rookie prosecutor, and how things have changed. So it's just as time goes on, you just see how much things do change.
Who are some of there's many lawyers obviously in the county, but who are some of the ones that stand out for their courtroom procedures or expertise or whatever?
Well, you start talking about criminal lawyers, you're going to hear lots of names. The names you're always going to hear: John Everett, W.H. Taylor, Joel Huggins. You're going to hear them mentioned when you're talking about great courtroom presences, great lawyers and whatnot. Yeah, I missed out on some of the really great ones. Bill Putnam was one that I think you talk to a lot of people who have been around a while and ask him about great lawyers, and he's going to be right there at the top of the list. I had the pleasure of trying a case against Charlie Davis. Charlie's an old timer, and he goes way back. But I had the pleasure of trying one against him, and you could tell. I mean, this was 15 years ago, and I don't know how old he was. He wasn't necessarily what I'd consider old, but he was an outstanding lawyer. He wasn't at the point where he needed to retire or anything. He was good. And that's kind of what everyone had told me who had had cases with him before is I'd heard stories of how good he was, and I saw it firsthand. And I've tried cases against the best of them. I've seen it firsthand, and that's why I throw in John Everett and W.H. Taylor and Joel Huggins, and there are a number of them. Those are the main ones. I wish I had seen Judge Gibson because he's the gold standard when it comes to prosecutors and probably to judges. I mean, he's the one that everyone's going to compare you to. Is how do you rank up against him? And he was kind of the one that you could, he was just an outstanding lawyer, an outstanding judge, and he dabbled a little bit in doing some criminal representation. He was of counsel he may still be of counsel at a law firm here, Taylor Law Partners, and he handled a few criminal cases, and I did get to see him do some of that stuff, some of those cases, and just fantastic. A lot of great lawyers have been coming through here. So, and I'm only hitting the tip of the iceberg because, like I said, I've been here a little over 20 years, and so, I only know from my experience. I don't have the experience from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and I don't have. I don't watch much civil practice. Walter Cox is. You ask any civil lawyer, he's the one that they'll tell you is the fantastic lawyer, but he does civil law. So I only see the criminal side of it.
Who are some of the unsung heroes in the prosecutor's office? Maybe
the staff.
But I mean, not just now, but maybe in the past that have really done. Maybe not the names you hear about or see as much, but who are? I know you have a good staff, but who are some of the ones that stand out that have done?
Well, it's in our office. Obviously, we rely on a very good, very skilled staff, and some of them have been here for years. Not many of them anymore because I've outlasted a lot of them. Debbie Strobel used to be our case coordinator. She was case coordinator. She came over with Terry in 1992. She had been with Terry when he was city prosecutor. So that's what Terry did before he got elected prosecuting attorneys. He was the city prosecutor, and I think he did that for maybe 10 years over there. So she was with him from the early 80s until she retired here 2 years ago, I think. And she was one of the ones that kind of kept everything together in the office. She kept the trains running on time, kind of like an air traffic controller, just trying to make sense of all these cases and all this chaos and everything else. that helps an office keep going. Now, we've got a great staff. We've got Karen Westfall has been in our office for, I think she started back with Andrew Zeiser. She may have even been hired by Kim Smith when he was prosecutor. She's been here since the mid-'80s, handling all our hot check stuff. She's our numbers person. She does handling all the hot check restitution that comes in, because there is still some hot check restitution coming in. People are still writing hot checks, believe it or not. But she kind of keeps that all up and going. We couldn't do what we do without our victim assistants. Dana Scott she's one of the ones who's been here before me. I think she started here in 1994, and she's the one that, I guess it's 25 years now she's been doing it, but we've got 3 victim assistants, Dana, Sarah Thomas, and Swanee Lopez, and they are invaluable to our office because they help coordinate things with victims. They keep them up to date. They kind of liaisons between our office and victims. They update victims not just on what's going on with the case, but when a case is coming up. They coordinate with them about if they're eligible for crime victims reparations. They meet with victims with us. They whenever we have a trial, they coordinate everything with victims, and that's such a big part of our office is handling is having someone there for victims, because when someone is the victim of a violent crime, they don't know this system from anything. I mean, and so they're totally unfamiliar, and it's to them that it appears these are just treacherous waters, and they need someone to help them navigate them, and that's what our victim assistants do, and those are the real unsung heroes here, because those are the cases that sometimes keep you awake at night, are those victims of violent crime, and you want to do right by them. And having someone with you who can help you, not just telling them when the next court date is, but giving them information, telling them here's what's going on, here's why we're doing this, having the horrible conversations of here's why we can't file charges in this case. Things like that. Those are terrible things to have to explain to someone. Those are very hard things to do. And so we couldn't do it without people like that.
Good. What challenges do you face now in your office? I mean, I know we've talked about technology and just increasing caseload. Is there others, or is that it?
The caseload is the big thing. I mean, when you're putting 4,000 cases through the system, that's the big challenge. Is having enough manpower and hours in the day to give each case the time and the work it deserves. It's an ever-changing equation and an ever-changing problem, in the sense that new things keep coming up, and so you're faced with new challenges. It seems almost like it's every day, but it's always something. Like when I started, the big challenge was, God, what are we going to do about all these methamphetamine labs? They're horrible. Legislature passed laws cutting down on the ease of getting ephedrine, making it much more difficult to make methamphetamine. Didn't wipe out methamphetamine, it just effectively shut down the production here. So that changed a little bit. Then, you move into the big challenge we face big challenge that law enforcement faces. It's drugs. I don't know off the top of my head what percentage of our cases are drug cases, but it's close to, my estimate would be close to half, but at least 2/3 of our cases are drug related. They may not have drugs on them, but they may be stealing to get money for drugs. So that's the challenge, is staying ahead of the curve. That's a challenge law enforcement has, is staying ahead of the curve, because you're getting more and more drugs out there on the street, more and more problems to combat, more and more dangerous drugs. Back 20 years ago, there's no such thing, or at least we had never heard of fentanyl. That was something that didn't appear on our radar till, a few years ago. Prescription drugs weren't that big of a problem back then. Heroin wasn't that big of a problem back then. So the challenges, they kind of seem to change, and it changes with time, it changes with the environment. And so the biggest thing that we try to do is stay ahead of the curve, and that's why when we were talking earlier about treatment, that's something, that's what we try to do. We try to stay ahead with the curve with treatment. But as I also said, treatment's not for everybody, because some people out there are a danger to society. There's some people out there peddling this stuff, selling it to kids, to whomever. And that's always going to be a problem. But when we talked earlier about how technology has made the biggest changes, that's also been for the negative too. One challenge that we face is technology, because technology makes it easier for criminals to do what they want to do. And it's a lot more dangerous now. It can be a lot more dangerous. We're seeing a lot more dangerous scenarios because of technology, because now you have predators out there who have access to children through the internet, through technology. Before, it's not, when I was a kid, you had to be afraid of the guy in the white paneled van, sliding the door open saying, "You want some candy, little girl? You want some candy, little boy?" They don't have to do that anymore. They get online and they look for kids online. And so technology has made it a lot easier for criminals to target children, to target anyone. I mean, it's a lot easier to target the elderly with scams, with technology. It's a lot easier to cover your tracks. So that's another area that we're having to stay, one step ahead of everyone. And we've got a couple of prosecutors in our office who are at the forefront of that. This cell phone technology, and trying to track missing children using technology. It's a process that's changing every day, and we've got people here who are trying to stay ahead of the curve by learning all this new technology. So that while it's been the biggest benefit, technology may also present the biggest challenge to us too.
Why prosecutor? I mean, was that a conscious decision, or did it just work out, or did you decide you wanted to be on the prosecution side instead of defense, or?
No, being a prosecutor, I think it was just fortuitous for me. I think it was blind luck. When I was a kid, my dad, he's still a lawyer, but I grew up the son of a lawyer. And so I went through a phase where I was the geeky lawyer's kid. And I was watching Perry Mason, I was watching Matlock, and I was intrigued by that stuff. And so I knew I wanted to be a lawyer at an early age, but I didn't have in my mind to be a prosecutor at an early age. I wasn't one of these who was born saying, that's what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. I went to law school, and went to law school here, and I, in my second and third year of law school, I was a law clerk at what was then Odom and Elliott Law Firm. Now it's the Odom Law Firm, but back then it was Odom and Elliott. And that's where I met my now wife. She was working at that office as administrative assistant, and she was from here, and was born and raised here. But when I was in my third year of law school, I started taking more and more classes. I knew I always wanted to be a courtroom lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer who was going to be handling cases, going to be trying cases. That kind of suited me. But more importantly, I wanted to stay up here in Fayetteville. And so I graduated law school, looked for jobs, looked everywhere, sent out letters, got plenty of rejection letters, kept trying, took the bar exam, waited around, found out I had passed it, still didn't have a job, and then my now wife called me and said, hey, there is an opening at the prosecutor's office up here. And so I said, oh, great. And so I sent in the application, came up here and interviewed, and got the job. And I remember one lawyer, when I said that I'd gotten a job at the prosecutor's office, told me, you know, kid, that's great. Now what you need to do is you need to work there for about 3 years, get you some good experience, and get out and get you a real job. And I don't know, when I started here, I'm certainly not the type of person who would take a job saying, you know what, I'm going to just go work here for 3 or so years and then go find something else. But I had never planned on being a prosecutor. But I got in it and fell in love with the job and never looked back. And there's lots of advice in the past from people who are older than me, my parents and others, that I wish I'd taken. I would like to go back and tell my younger self to listen to your dad when he says that. But that's one piece of advice I'm glad I didn't take, because I can't imagine doing something else. I mean, this is work that I absolutely love. This job's kind of a calling. It's not for everybody. And it's not just about, some people think that prosecutors are just sitting around saying, okay, who can I lock up today? It's not about that. It's about justice, as corny as that may sound. But it really is, because this job is really the only job, certainly in the legal business, in the legal community, where your sole job, your sole purpose is to do the right thing. Regardless of whether or not that's a win or a loss, you are sworn to do the right thing. You're held to a higher standard, and we don't count wins and losses based on jury verdicts. We have to consider what's the right thing, what's the just thing to do, and those are wins and losses for us. I think that's why I love this job, and that's why I've stuck with it. As I said a little bit ago, in law school, I never would have imagined I'd be sitting here. It just isn't something that I thought I'd be doing. I thought I'd be doing, civil law, doing personal injury cases or insurance defense or something like that. Never thought 20 years later I'd be sitting here.
What's something that most people don't know about the prosecutor's office? Most people don't know.
I think that most people don't know that it's not all about wins and losses here. It's not all about getting convictions. I think that's something that's been portrayed on TV and in movies and in books, is you've got the prosecutor that you've always got the ambitious prosecutor. It's always some type of caricature. It's seeking higher office. Is people work in the prosecutor's office because they want to run for Congress or they want to be a judge or do whatever, and so they're going to go out and they're going to do whatever they can to rack up this conviction record and get all these guilty verdicts and everything else. And I don't mean to downplay the importance of the success of an office, because when you take a case to trial, your goal should be a conviction, because otherwise, if it's not, you shouldn't be taking it to trial. I mean, that's the thing. But every case that starts off in this office doesn't end up in a conviction, and there are a number of reasons behind that. And one of the reasons is because it's our job to make sure that justice is done and make sure that the right thing is done. And in certain situations, when we're presented with evidence that this person didn't commit this crime, we can't say, oh, well, we've already charged this guy. I've got to save face and stick with it. You got to do the right thing. That's one thing that I know. I try not to get bothered by fictional portrayals, but and there are. I don't want to make it. I don't want to be playing a little song of poor me here, because there are plenty of instances in the media where you have the prosecutor who's portrayed as being noble, but typically you have the prosecutor you see is a win-at-all-cost type person, and that's not what a prosecutor is. And that's the thing I think is important about this office, and important to know about this office, is that we strive every day when we walk in those doors to do the right thing, make sure justice is done.
Okay, we're about wrapped up here. If you ran into somebody that didn't know anything about Washington County, maybe you were out of state or in a different part of the state, and they said, tell me about Washington County, what's it like? What would you tell them?
I would say that I grew up in Crittenden County, and I grew up in the Mississippi Delta. I grew up across the river from Memphis, Tennessee, and I love my hometown, but I think this is, I don't want to sound corny, but this is perfection. This is like a little slice of, it's a slice of everything. I mean, that's the great thing about Washington County, is you get a little bit of everything here. It's the people are, it's a broad range of people. You get a little bit of everything here. You get a little bit of everything, all kinds of weather. I can look out my window here, and I can look at Old Main, and I can look, at the Boston Mountains. I can see the beauty of this area. It's the perfect place to live, I think. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. I think it's great for, it's a great place for families. It's a great place for business. It's a great place for sports. Great place for people who love the outdoors. And whatever your background, whatever your ideology, political persuasion, you can find a place in Washington County, because we've got it all. My favorite thing about Washington County is the people. You just get most of my experience comes from Fayetteville, because I live in Fayetteville. I mean, obviously, with my job, I'm in Springdale all the time. I'm over in Madison County. I mean, that's another, I love Madison County. Madison County's Madison County's beautiful. Madison County's great. But most of my experience comes from Fayetteville. And there are things that will irritate the fool out of me about Fayetteville. Traffic is one of them. Because Fayetteville, no matter how big it gets, it always seems kind of like a small town. And I think that's kind of part of by design. The folks of Fayetteville try to keep it as close to as it's always been. And so I like that atmosphere. You go up to Springdale. I'm kind of a sucker for nostalgia and for history. I love seeing an old renovated building, and I think I like driving down Emma Street and seeing what they've done, because you can look at driving down downtown Springdale, you can see the old Springdale, whether it's the Apollo Theater or a number of the other businesses that have been redone and kept up. I like that. I like the fact that throughout Washington County there's an appreciation for history. Washington County's got a great history, and I love the fact that the people here acknowledge that and embrace it, because when you've got a history that great, you want to cherish it.